Kinari Webb is the founder of Health and Harmony, an international nonprofit dedicated to reversing global heating, understanding that rainforests are essential for the survival of humanity, and a co-founder of Alam Sehat Lestari. Dr. Webb graduated from Yale University School of Medicine with honors and currently splits her time between Indonesia, international site assessments, and the San Francisco Bay Area. Guardians of the Trees is her debut. And Joyful is a social entrepreneur, an internationally renowned keynote speaker, and a New York Times best-selling author. Her memoir, The Girl Who Smiled Beads, debuted with Crown Publishing in April 2018 and is published in 8 languages. Joyful is currently the founder of 10 Houses, a private network dedicated to cultivating entrepreneurship and equity, and a co-founder of Thingy, an online platform whose mission is to capture, organize, and share creative ways of being to foster belonging. We are so grateful to have Kinari and Joyful here in conversation today, so I'm going to let them take it away.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you so much, Victoria. It's so amazing that we're all here together, especially at this time where it's getting a bit cold many places, and you could bundle up with a really nice book and disappear. And what a best way to bundle up on a couch or on your bed with a book that reminds you of the gift of life, which forests, trees are the gift of life. If we don't have them, we're nothing, really. So I am hoping that you get a chance to read The Guardian of Trees, and later on you join us in this very beautiful journey that Kinari is leading us on. Kinari, I remember meeting you about what was in 2013. Yeah. And you were up on a stage, welcoming us to be able to be in a place of this thought, of being able to be aware of our surroundings, and especially surroundings that are the keys to our breath and therefore our heartbeat. And I'm not sure if you remember, but we lost most of our audience, you and I, to someone else that I'm not going to mention the name. But before I go any further, I would love to share a conversation and the structure that I've created so that all of us will be able to be aligned. So the conversation structure is, we are starting in the present, where you are right now, Kinari, your life at this moment. I know that you have been on a book tour, lots of Zooms, lots of conversation. And then we're gonna go to the past, sort of what led you to the present. And then you might invite us to join you in the future. And so that's the structure of our conversation. And so with that, how are you, Kinari?
Oh, Joyful. I remember that.
How are you?
Before I go to the present, I just have to tell you that when that time when we met, so we were both speaking, and I had to speak after, at the time, Clementine. So she's changed. She's added Joyful to her name, which is so fitting and exactly right, as this little girl added your name, being able to see your soul. But I couldn't believe I had to speak after you, because normally when I'm going to speak, I'm like preparing, but nope, I was totally focused on what you were saying. And I just got up there on the stage afterwards with tears running down my cheeks, just like, okay, now how could anyone come after you? And then we became very good friends. So such a delight. I am good. It was so hard. The run up to this book coming out was just intense, because I was very vulnerable in this book. And I did it because I knew I did it in service of the planet. I did it in service of where we need to go. But I'll tell you, right before it came out, I was like, can I pull it? Is it too late? I've been working on this book for years and now I don't even want it to go out in the world. But since it did come out, and I've been getting wonderful feedback, and I'm just so happy. And at this very moment, a character in the book, she's not a character, she's a human being, but I talked about her in the book. My dear friend Idarasi, who's a Balinese high priestess, she's staying with me, and I'm just feeling so happy. Just nestled. Both of our children are here, and
it's almost like I love.
Go ahead.
It's a beautiful circle, and how's everyone? How are, in terms of like, where are you in your thoughts right now after, releasing the book? It's out now, it's in public, it's in people's hands, people are commenting on it, people are sharing it. How is it for you? How is it for your family? How's everyone taking in this beautiful, not responsibility, but more of like, we are going to be counted to these words?
Yeah. Well, it really helps that the response has been so positive. I can't tell you how many of my friends have written me and said, I expected to get to the book at some point, but then I picked it up, I read the first few pages and I couldn't put it down. And I stayed up all night reading it. And then I bought 10 copies and gave it to every friend of mine. So that kind of, that feels good. That feels good.
Yeah.
But more importantly, that's actually, I guess one would say, that feels good to my ego, but really what matters to me is how many people have written me and said, this book has moved me to make great change. A friend of mine in Sweden wrote me to say that she is decided after reading my book that she's going to run for prime minister. Because this is the decisive decade. And if we don't do something now, we won't make it. Another friend who is in the events industry said she's decided that she wants to just go full in. Everything she does is to make the events world more sustainable because it's one of the worst, most polluting industries. So, yeah.
Oh. I could speak a lot about that, especially I could speak about a lot about that, but I don't want to go there because, recently I realized that I don't want to fight against the current. And in terms of this conversation, people who live in the forest, around the forest, people who live where sun hits the most, people where the rain takes everything, they've been experiencing this life. And finally, we are all aware of these elements, for me, because I love mythology, thinking about thunder and the rain as part of our being, and thinking about the sun as a part of our being, thinking about the earth as a part of our being, and how we care for it. And, and going back to how are you today with, your surrounding? I mean, I'm looking at your garden in the back, like, how are you in the garden right now? How are you? What are you seeing? What's shifting?
Oh, I love it. California, it's raining in California at the moment, which is just the most exquisitely beautiful gift right now. After so much drought and dryness, to just feel the rain coming down, it's just I feel like our garden is just going, yes, and that's how I feel too. I'm delighted, just really enjoying it. It's a little cold, but that feels great. Yeah, I'm feeling these days.
It's really great if everyone right now
Go ahead.
You feeling like you're grounded in space.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And that shifting, wherever our audience is right now, just take a look outside right now. What is that you see in terms of our conversation, or just the beings right outside? If it's the trees, if it's the rain, if it's the wind, how are we with what's outside? I am currently in Berlin. It's 1:13, and the wind was just dancing yesterday. And I have not had a chance to be in the autumn weather such as this. And so I've been crawling up in the couch and facing the window and being in gratitude for the wind, for doing what it does. And it sounds really silly, but I took a little walk to just say thank you, wind, even though you are trashing everywhere. Thank you. Thank you for being present. Thank you for giving us a different way of being with trees, because all the leaves are falling. So that's what, I feel like, starting in the present tense. And when we think about the past, to adds to our curiosity, and that drives us to today. And so, Kinari, will you share? And I'm not sure if everyone who's listening have had a chance to learn about where you grew up, and the journey that led you to, the rainforests that you write about, even just saying being a good one of the guardian of the forest. So can you take us there?
So I actually grew up in New Mexico, which has a different kind of forest, a very widely dispersed forest, a more high desert forest. I grew up in a way that many people, it's unusual to grow up in America these days in this way. I would leave in the morning and come home at night. I just spent the day, most days, out in the wilderness. And I had a horse, and I would just ride up into the hills. I co-owned a horse with a neighbor, and yeah, wild, beautiful spaces. And I think that I recently heard an interesting thing about how, just like with language, that there's a sort of formative time in our brains where if we are exposed to nature when we're very young, then we can learn the language of ecology, the language of interconnectedness. And that if we experience that later in our life, much like with language, it's too late for it to be your native language. And you can still learn, but it's learning it in the part of your brain that just adds facts. It's not learning it in the base part of your brain. And which is why probably most indigenous communities and rainforest communities who grow up intimately connected to nature know it so well, and know that truth that you can't separate human well-being from the well-being of the environment. They are one. And I feel like I'm unusual in the West for having had that experience. And I know you had all of this beautiful time when you were young in Rwanda, in your grandmother's garden. And I think that those experiences, they become a native language.
Absolutely. Also adding to that, our interaction becomes the language as well. I mean, in your book, you spend so much time, at least your formative life, with this horse and your relationship, and how this horse sort of showed you the world in a way that, a dog might not.
Yeah,
And
we're headed straight for the cliff. Yeah.
Yeah.
That kind of is where we are, but it's maybe not too late. And that
well, it's and I love both the symbolism of the horse, but then also the formative experiences of your longing to continue to want to learn what is more beyond where I am, what is beyond, what is beyond the cliff, because sometimes you have to fall off the cliff. When I fall off the cliff, where do I go? And I feel this segues to like your college experiences, to, leading you to Indonesia. And so can you share a little bit more about that?
It is so funny because it is the metaphor I have used so many times in my life of like, okay, I jumped off the cliff again, right? Or stepped off it, right? And it's like each time there's kind of a magic step that appears out of the mist, right? But it looks like you're going to go right off the cliff. I have done that many, many times. And so the first time was moving to Indonesia, was when I went to Indonesia to study orangutans as an undergraduate. I mean, whoo, that was stepping off the cliff. And it was amazing and beautiful and transformative, and it changed my entire life. And just to have the opportunity to learn from the forest, learn from the orangutans, and learn from the people, from the rainforest communities. And they totally shifted my perspective in a way that I didn't understand that because of this long history of colonialism, communities throughout the tropics have no resources, right? They've been stolen from these communities for hundreds and hundreds of years. And when resources are just not there, and someone in your family needs medical care, you will cut down the rainforest that you perfectly well see is your future to achieve your present, and hate it while you're doing it. Know that it's the wrong thing to do, and yet have no other choice. And this is where our world has ended us. This long history of pain and stealing has resulted in a situation which could be the end of life on Earth for humans and for much of the biodiversity on this planet. And the rainforests are this incredible key. And these communities can be the guardians. They can protect and transform our planet and feed the lungs of the earth, the heart of the earth. They can protect this precious, precious, precious ecosystems that we all need to thrive, that contain half the world's species, that fuel rain here in California from the forest in the Amazon, right? Like rivers in the air, and the oxygen and the carbon sequestration, the pulling down the carbon from the atmosphere that humans have released, right? Like these trees are, I mean, they are the key part of the survival of this planet. And they're like, but it's not like like a machine, like, oh, do they do this? They're like this exquisite, beautiful living beings. And their guardians, the rainforest communities, just need some thank yous from the world so that they can be those precious guardians. fully. They already are, of course. And they could use some support to be that even more. So that's what this book is about.
I love that. And, I had shared, this question with you in terms of, you had the opportunity to feel this preciousness. Not that many people from our audience or in the world are able to be immersed in this gift. But this gift that is extremely so inviting, but also so foreign to many of us. So I'm wondering if you could dive into maybe a moment, a day, if you need to close your eyes and be transported to a time that was so powerful in one location where we can join you and feel this preciousness.
Yeah. Imagine trees that are 22 stories high. And they're not like a conifer with just a tiny point up top. They're like an oak tree with these huge trunks, and then the branches go out way up high. And then there's not just like those really tall trees, there's all the trees down below. And then at the base, these streams of just crystal clear water. And just living, the forest is living in a way that I have never experienced anything else. On every level, from a far distance, and just the diversity, everything is different. Everything you land your eye on is different. And then down to the smallest level, you look at any given leaf, and it will have lichen on it, and insects, and and a little bite from an animal, and there's just so everything is alive. And it's a metaphor for our planet where actually everything is alive, but we don't always see it in exactly that way, right? But boy, those rainforests, they are more alive. I sometimes used to say that I wondered, why could I experience the divine so much more clearly in the forest than anywhere else? Why could I feel that unity of all life, that connectedness? And partly I felt it was just because you're just surrounded by life. There's just so much of it, And it's moving and it's changing all the time. And at the same time, it's utterly immovable. It's like both.
Yes.
Like thousands of years of these trees being there. And yet all these different creatures and beings constantly moving on them and around them. And yet they're just this.
Yes.
It's sacred. And, that's how most rainforest communities feel about the forest. One man once said to me, he said, "How do I feel about the forest? What do you mean? She's my mother."
Yes. Yes. That is the narrative that I grew up on. Everything, especially trees, are the greatest of our parents because they're feeding us. Thank you so much for taking us into that place. And I feel, and as I had asked you, and for our audience, really thinking about when we think about a forest or when we think about trees, to really think of them in all of our five senses and think of them in a narrative that is like, what is a tree? When is a tree? Who is a tree? And then go and understanding also the forest as the home for the trees and all these other beings. And when we come into that ways of seeing. And when we quietly listen, what is that we discover? It's beyond our human perception, because then the trees and all beings in the forest become our teacher. And I know that sounds very, whatever it is that you want to call it, but right now, yeah, right now, and that's why I love speaking in present tense of every being that is giving us life, because we talk about the forest as if they're going to disappear, and many of them have, but giving that even the language power, we are also ending them. And you can't end what gives you the source of your life.
That's right.
I mean, and so this goes back to, chapter 15, but also like chapter 10, really thinking about radical listening, and then coming back into being able to see like this systematic stories that make us actually miss seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, asking these questions, because we're all been put in a category where we cannot ask without words, right? We ask with words, but what if we listened and I ask with words, but I ask with our eyes, ask with our sense of touch? And so this brings back to radical listening, which I just love it so much. So take us into your work once you recognize the lushness of this place and you recognize the gift, but then you realize all the truth of this place and the destruction of it.
So when a tree that's that big falls to the ground, it's an unbelievable loss. And it like physically hurts. And I just thought, well, what is going on with these horrible people? Why would they do this? But then in talking to them and understanding, when you have no choice, when it's access to healthcare that you need, and you don't want to do it, but you don't have any choice, right? So we did radical listening. So that means trusting that the local communities know what the solutions are. They want to protect the forest. We knew that from surveys. I knew that from talking to so many people. But what would they need as a thank you from the world community so that they could thrive and the forest could thrive? And they said, we need access to high quality, affordable healthcare, and we need training in sustainable agriculture. And if we have those things, and as an outsider, I could look at these communities and go, there's like all kinds of problems, right? It's like electricity's no good, the roads are terrible, there's education's, but no, they're like these two things. And boy, were they right. And within just the first, 5 years in, we had a 68% drop in logging households. 10 years in, we had a 90% drop, and now it's very close to zero. And these communities are not protecting the forest, but also thriving in a way that they haven't before. Where in the past, it felt the way people described it was everything was always getting worse. You didn't have access to healthcare. You had to log to pay for it. That made health worse. Then you had to, borrow money. Then you got, then you lost your rice field. It's just like everything just kept getting worse. But now everything was getting better. People, to the point where many of these, one of the village leaders at one point says he was giving a speech to a whole bunch of people, and I happened to be in the audience. And he said, "We are the pathfinders for where the world needs to go, for how to live in balance with our environment. And now we want to teach the world." This sense of like, Just give us the next problem. And if the next problem is on a global scale, we'll take it on. Because they were just so empowered by the sense of like, we can take on any problem and solve it. And because, and so many people coming up to me, just even to this day, they'll say, boy, when I designed this program, I did such a good job. Because that is the truth. These communities designed exactly what the solutions were. And they didn't just design like the overarching how to solve these problems. They designed every detail of them. And it worked. It worked. We stabilized the loss of the primary forest. 52,000 acres of rainforest grew back. Across the board improvements in health, including a 67% drop in infant mortality.
Wow.
People are just, they're doing great, right? And I see this and I'm like, we got to do this everywhere, right? Like, and so that's what we've been trying, right? We're doing it in another place in Borneo. We're doing it in Madagascar, where it's also like just working incredibly well. The Malagasy communities where we were working with around Monumbo National Park, they said after the first round of radical listening, they're like, no one's ever done this before. We've had lots of nonprofits come in here, and no one has ever asked us what the solutions are.
Yes. Yes. And I mean, that is the power and the beauty of radical listening. When we are listening to each other, even though visually we might see the broken road, this broken school, the broken system, when you hear a person saying to you, no, we're actually just fine. Those roads be just fine. If we have a place where we could take care of our health, we'll stop deforestation because this is what we're doing it for. And so this is what I'm really excited about. And I've been excited about since like 2013. And I cannot believe we're all here having this conversation today. And now everyone's like hopping on as a hot topic, as a hashtag. And I'm like, go sit down. Go sit down. Maybe we give them an instruction with every hashtag. It's like, what is your responsibility and accountability using that hashtag? Can you show us from step 1 to step 5 on how you are going to be able to honor and respect this conversation into action? Because it's really, we started talking about how conferences, pollute. There's one big conference that I went to speak a couple years ago. It's about 18,000 people in Washington, D.C. It was like, it had to do, of course, with the global climate and poverty. And, I had only about 5-minute tops to share what I had to share about growing up in 9 different countries and things that I witnessed in both a place of lack and also abundance. Mm-hmm. And then I decided to stay until the end. So I walked to the park across and just watched as the whole event ended. And then after that, I walked and took pictures. And I thought, how can we stand and talk about poverty and talk about climate when we are done, the whole place completely trashed? That's hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. And then I realized it's all information. It's people are being downloaded. They feel really good for that few hours. People sign up forever, but there's no action that we can look back in. We could put billions of dollars, which that's the case for those conferences. We can make all these different promises. And so one of my dear mentors says, criticize by creating. And criticize by creating, I think, is Michelangelo who asked who first, criticize others by creating. And with that, I have this thing that I do every month. I pick a word, I pick a color, and I allow the word and the color, and maybe sometimes a book to lead me into the month. And this month's word is value.
Oh, that's such a good
I think
word. I have lots of opinions about that word.
And the word came from the conference that both of you and I attended, when we got this plaque with our name on it, and in the back of it, it was, what is value? I don't know if you remember that. And then we got a water bottle, and it says, water is like money.
I know, and you're like, nope. Wrong.
Don't trick me.
Let's talk to our Indigenous colleagues about if water is money. Yeah.
I'm like, no, water is not money, and money is not water. Let's just back up a little bit. Again, like the forest, we are all water. And if you're going to say water's money, we are in trouble. And if you say forest are money, we are in trouble.
That's correct.
So what is, and what is value? Who is value? When is value?
Yeah.
How is and how much is value?
It's so interesting because so many people in looking at our work will say, oh, well, why don't you do carbon trading? And I'm just like, I don't want to do carbon trading, because carbon trading is all about like the forest, reducing this exquisite, beautiful, sacred, incredibly complex thing to one of its values, right? But its values are not just for humans, right? Its values are for itself. Its value is inherent. Its value is creation of life, right? On every level. So it's not just carbon, right? And when you reduce something to one piece of its preciousness, you actually reduce its value, not increase it. And that is a serious problem. And the other, there's this really interesting stuff about implicit versus explicit value. So let me give you an example.
Yes.
In the United States, you get paid to give blood, because the idea is if you pay for something, you'll get more of it, right? But in Europe, you don't get paid to give blood. You do it from your own heart motivation because it's the right thing to do to help someone else. And then if you're giving blood, it's in alignment with your values because you know you're doing something good in the world. In the US, you might feel like you're doing something good in the world, but you're also getting paid for it. So it kind of messes it up a little bit. Well, guess who gives more blood? The Europeans. You would think that paying for it is going to mean you're going to get more. No, it means you get less. Because you're not doing it from heart motivation. So we have set up our work. That's why that's why in Radical Listening we say, what do you need as a thank you from the world community so you can protect these forests? Because for me, it is about mutual gift giving around the world. And in the first 10 years of the program, around our first site, Gunung National Park, the world gave about a little over $5 million worth of thank yous to these communities. Healthcare, actually building a hospital, beautiful organic farming training from folks in Java. There was, it's all, and it's now, of course, 100% Indonesian staff. And there's, there were many beautiful gifts, goats for widows and all kinds of great stuff, right? All designed by the communities. And in return, the communities gave back, and here I'm going to use that terrible word that I don't ever want to use and that I hate. Just in the carbon, just in the primary forest, $65 million worth of carbon, right? So like the gifts going, it's like, you can't even count them, right? Because that's just the primary forest, just the carbon, not the like biodiversity, the water cycling, the, all of the value of that forest. But then that's just the value for humans. What about the value for the forest, right? So it's like,
yeah,
so this, but to say that these communities have something so much more precious to give the world than the world has to give to them. Oh, and that's my son.
Yay! Thank you. Thank you. And I want to be aware of time. And for those whom I have questions, I don't want to go without sort of, if you have any questions for Kinari, please share it in the chat so that either Victoria or someone can take it and we can share it. I love that, and it makes me think about.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if anyone wants to learn about radical listening, we're actually going to be doing a training coming up pretty soon. So radical listening, we're going to do 2 actually in November and December. So if anyone wants to join, that'd be a delight. So, but go ahead, Joyful.
Do you have a link that you could put in the chat?
Yeah, I'll put it in.
Okay, please put the link in it so that people could sign up. This is you getting like a premium, like good stuff. This is good stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, it's radicallistening.org. Oh, I'm so happy to see this. Finally. Henry, I'm so excited. I've been waiting this my whole life. Really. Yeah, going back to radical listening and going back to value, what is really value? I think, and then you were talking about blood and, either getting paid or offering from your heart. I think a lot about heart intelligence. And I feel that heart intelligence, it's everyone. If you have a heart, you're intelligent already. The most beautiful part of heart intelligence, at least for me in practice, is really awakening all of our senses. Maybe I shouldn't speak for we, I should speak for myself. Heart intelligence for me means being able to be sensory sensitive. And by that I mean being able to listen and being able to see clear and not ask only question with words, but really ask question with my other senses. And so if there is blood drive to be able to say, what does this really mean to my sense of being alive? And then thinking about how the heart itself as a transportation to somebody to be able to have the life that we have in all of our senses. And I could add to that, thinking about the forest, thinking about every element around us, from forest, and I always call them the gardens. I always say from the ocean gardens all the way to the sky gardens. Right now, everyone is in the sky garden because they want to go and colonize it. It's really funny. But thank goodness for Sky Garden, because we have internet, we're able to communicate. And so from when we understand in that intelligence that in each one of us, that I have, that we have, how do we think about the gardens from the ocean all the way down, all the way to the top, in all of our senses, and being very clear in the values, how we go about our everyday. That is an invitation. And so, Kinari, I am not sure if anyone has questions, but I would sort of pause here and allow others to ask questions, and then we'll close it out with that, with lead us, invite us to create something, an action today in our neighborhood. All people could sign up for radical listening. So taking it as you close it too.
So that was such a beautiful discussion. Absolutely loved that. I just want to send a reminder that if anyone does have questions, use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will get those answers for you guys. But in the meantime, we do have a few questions. So, Kinari, your book seems to foster so much change, and it really inspires the people who read it. Did you see your book being so moving when you were writing it, and was that your intention with the book, to like see all these changes and inspirations coming from the people that read it?
No. So I first started to write this book just kind of as a sort of like how-to manual that might be a little, that other folks might find useful for doing something similar, but that is not where it ended up. Sometimes the story comes through you. I know many authors talk about that. And I ended up sharing a lot of my own journey and my own healing. And the reason that I did that was because I realized, and the more into it I got, the more I realized the personal healing is the global healing. It is the community healing. You can't, they're all interrelated. And the only way I could really show that was to be vulnerable and show it. And I didn't have hope. This is a journey for me about my own lack of hope, about my own colonialism, about my own just all the mistakes I made, right? And my very slow learning, right? And I'm sure that I know I'm still learning already. I read the book, I'm like, oh, it's like that, yeah, it's a process of showing my own journey of finding hope. And I think that's so important, because we all need to find that hope. And then when I found it, how much it motivated me to make a difference in the world. And then I just, to be willing to step off more cliffs, because when I knew that change was possible, then how could I not try to make it happen? Yeah.
Yeah, what a beautiful response. And I'm sure that hearing all these stories of how people reading your book have really inspired them is just so rewarding for you.
Well, it's the reason I wrote it, in the sense of I want to help bring about what Joanna Macy calls the great turning.
Mm-hmm.
This shift towards a thriving future for all life on Earth. And that, in that service, I'm willing to do almost anything.
Very nice. So you mentioned a lot the quote of, when I fall off the cliff, and where do I go? So do you have any advice for falling off the cliff? Is it more of like a fall, a jump, a walk? Like what would your advice be for someone falling off the cliff, basically?
A way to go for whoever's in the audience jumping off cliffs.
Yeah.
I have a magnet on my refrigerator that says jump and the net will appear.
I love that. I'm gonna have to remember that one.
Yeah, I mean, that is really truly my experience. The net will appear. And when you listen to that still quiet voice of wisdom in your heart and it is telling you to do something, just trust it. It is terrifying. I mean, I have done things like move to Indonesia with no job, right? And change will happen. Things will happen. It's just, it will happen. Trust it. And my experience is the more the net appeared, the more comfortable I felt. Like, okay, next jump, next jump, next jump.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I absolutely love that. That's something, the biggest thing I'm taking away from tonight is falling off the cliff. And I love the net appearing once you do it. I think that's something that people kind of forget, and that's the scariest part. So I think you putting it that way is absolutely amazing. So let's see what other questions we have. So you had mentioned you're really like surrounded by life in the forest because of these trees and the thousands of years that they have and the stories that they could hold. Do you think that there are any other areas or places that you could maybe feel the same way or even any similar way as you would in the forest? Or do you think the forest just kind of holds all that potential that like nothing else can compare with?
I kind of feel like the forest has it to a pretty intense degree, but I mean, there's this beautiful oak tree in the land that I get to steward for a short period of time in the life of this land. I get to honor the indigenous previous inhabitants of this land, and I get to care for this tree. And I have to tell you that this tree, this giant, beautiful oak tree, is also for me a teacher, I think is maybe the best word I could use.
Yeah.
Like a mother, a care. She cares for us, we care for her, kind of.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Okay. So you had talked about the rainforest community and kind of how they shifted your perspective. What would you say is the biggest way that the people from this rainforest community kind of shifted your perspective and the biggest thing you took away from them?
Well, I'm always, I have to admit, this is part of my process of learning, right? Is that when we first started, I knew that the rainforest communities that I was working with would know more than I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I still suspected, well, maybe they didn't know that much, right? And some of the solutions they came up with, like organic farming training, I was like, seriously? Like, really? Like, okay, we're gonna do it. But and boy, they were just so right on so many like really profound, deep levels that about enhancing human health and well-being, about all of the poisoning that people were getting from the herbicides and the pesticides, about the expense. So you often had to log to be able to pay for them, and knowing that there were traditional ways of farming in one place, but not knowing what they were because their form of agriculture had been slash and burn. And that had worked really well when there was lots of forest and not many people. But they themselves were identifying that now they needed to learn a new way.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very interesting to me because there's a lot of people who romanticize rainforest communities and say, these are people, they know their traditional ways are exactly the right ways for now and ever. But these communities are saying, no, actually, we want to learn a new way. And they were just thriving. I mean, it was just working so well.
Mm-hmm.
So really, and then like, I'll give you an example where we really did it wrong. So the one part of the program that the community did not design was the monitoring of whether or not logging was happening. Because I figured communities would cheat, right? I mean, I figured they would say, no, there's no logging here. But in fact, there was. But so we had the National Park Office do it. Guess what? The National Park Office, turned out many of their staff had reason to not exactly convey the information correctly. So it got to a point where we had to go back to the communities, apologize, and say, look, we should have had you design this in the first place. How do we do this? And they were like, yeah, you should have. Like, didn't you learn?
Yeah.
So, and then they designed a system called the Forest Guardians, or in Indonesian, they also call them best friends of the forest. And these are people in every single community all the way around the national park who speak exactly that language, because there are many, many languages in this region. They know all the loggers, they know everyone in the community because they grew up there, and they can find solutions on an individual family basis. And they can also monitor the forest much, much better. And it turned out to be a really good system that worked incredibly well.
Yeah.
So this is just like yet again another example of it's specific to each location, right? Like each region is going to have its own solutions, but those solutions will be consistent in that region. We could have many, many hours of radical listening in a given region. Each community would independently come to the same solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just realized it's almost 5 o'clock. Sorry, I've been talking like crazy.
No, you're fine. So it is 8 o'clock or maybe 5 o'clock, depending on where you are. So I just want to end it with one final question. Let's get Joyful back up here because I would like for her to answer as well. Our viewers love to know what you guys are reading, maybe what's on your bedside table, what you're reading now. So what are you reading right now?
Go ahead, Joyful, you go first.
I am reading The Real Wealth of the Nation. The Real Wealth of the Nation, and I cannot pronounce her name, but I have been listening to it, and it's speaking about caring economy, and caring economy actually allows us to be able to sustain the life of everything. And so it's been a really wonderful book to dive into, especially right now since I'm thinking about what is value.
I love that book. That's a great book.
Yeah.
Reading Sweetgrass. I'm just finishing now. I've been cherishing each chapter. It's such an exquisitely beautiful book from a scientific and indigenous perspective of the value of other ways of knowing, the value of thousand-year traditions, of many, many thousand-year traditions of learning how all is integrated, of ecology, of a felt sense, a known sense of ecology, and that truth, that knowledge is in many, many, many cases way better than science, whatever science means.
Well, now our viewers, aside from your books, have 2 new books that they can look into if they wanted to. So we are unfortunately out of time. I could listen to you 2 talk forever. So let's just end it here before I get too caught up in the beautiful things that were said tonight. You 2 are both such beautiful speakers, and we are so happy to have you here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, and do not forget to purchase a copy of Guardians of the Trees. Links are still in the chat box for you guys to go. Just click right on them and purchase them easily from there. So go ahead and buy your copy, and thank you for joining us. And thank you both so much for being here tonight.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.